Let's start with this. Anthony Davis has been on an unbelievable stretch as of late. He's had 37 or more points in 4 of his last 5 games. Is he now playing well enough to be considered in the same tier as Jokic, Embiid, when we're talking about that absolute top class of big men around the league?
Dude, I'm so excited to talk about this with you. You're the specific person that I think is the perfect person to have this discussion with. I know because you're a huge Jokic fan. I, as of late, have ranked Embiid above him, and obviously Anthony Davis is on this tear. I'm excited to get into it. That was an impressive win for the Lakers, by the way. They went down into Houston and just crushed them. And Anthony Davis looked great. LeBron James was just playing old man ball, passing the basketball around. Rui Hachimura just yeah, I've always said position battles are like the best thing to bring out the best in a basketball player. And it's like, hey, dude, do all the dirty work or sit behind Jared Vanderbilt. And he stepped in and he's playing really well. It was a good win. The Lakers are looking really, really good. As of right now, they are literally tied in the loss column for the 5 seed. Can you believe that after this season? But so this is my take, Carson. I think that Anthony Davis is in the same tier with those guys, but does not have a case to be considered above them. Again, you have to factor in availability with this stuff. Like, I frequently get in trouble with Laker fans who act like I don't value Anthony Davis when simply I look at it from the standpoint of what he looks like when he's available and in a rhythm versus when he's dealing with injuries. And the fact of the matter is he's not been able to finish a playoff series healthy since he hoisted the trophy. That's just a fact. And that's an important footnote on Anthony Davis's career. He has the ability to clear that reputation, right? Just like Joel Embiid has in recent seasons by playing through pain and being more available to his team. But like when I look at it, he's not the same offensive player as Joel and Nikola Jokic. That's obvious. He's not the same level of isolation score or post score that Joel Embiid is. He's not the same passer, not in the same stratosphere. Neither is Joel Embiid to Nikola Jokic. But I do think he's a significantly better defensive player than both of them. I think his ability to protect the rim supersedes both by a significant margin, and he has the versatility to switch out onto the perimeter. He's the ideal small ball big in NBA history. I've often said that, Anthony Davis has never had the case to say he's the best defensive player in the league because of his availability, but I do think his defensive ceiling is as high, if not higher, than any player in the NBA. And make no mistake, he's not a slouch on the offensive end of the floor. We've seen it recently. This is his third consecutive game with 38 plus points. He's gone for 35 plus 13 times this year. Most of his scoring average stuff, which dude, he's still averaging 26 points per game. It's not like he's got some low average, but he does have issues with consistency of aggression. He does have issues when it comes to settling for jump shots from time to time. But when he is engaged, healthy, trusting his foot, and locked in on both ends of the floor, he's every bit as impactful as Jokic and Embiid when they're at that same level. So I'm curious to see, do you think I'm jumping the gun there? Do you think there's a gap, or do you buy AD as that level of player?
I think when we're talking about ceilings, absolutely. And there's plenty of evidence for that. I mean, Anthony Davis 2020 in the bubble run was viewed as a bona fide top 3, top 4 player in the world, had one of the best two-way runs that we've ever seen. And sure, that was a bit unfair because he just decided he was going to shoot 38% from deep, which we've never seen from him in any other stretch of his basketball career. But nevertheless, the ceiling, you're right, when he's available, is best defensive player on the planet. And we've seen some offensive production from him this year that we've never seen before in terms of the skill. And I think that that's a huge reason this has been such an awesome season for him. Like the dominance that he's had in that short range shot making outside the restricted area, but his hooks and his floaters, 48% on those shots is 8% up from last year almost. He's been significantly better for mid range, and he's stopped taking a lot of the bad jump shots, I feel, at least in comparison to some of these previous years. Like AD's been a horrible 3-point shooter for the last 3 years now, and he's taking less of them this year. And I think that's just a benefit to his game. He's been aggressive. He's been physical. He's been efficient. Like if you look at these last 2 games, I think he has 13 offensive boards, and he's creating second chance opportunities for himself off his own misses. It's like when AD sees Alperen Sengun and goes right into his chest and either just goes through him and gets a layup or puts up that little touch shot, that's awesome when he consistently does that. He's had an awesome rebounding season, great defensive player. The Lakers are a top 3 defense when he plays. They're a bottom 5 defense when he doesn't. Like, this is what Anthony Davis can be. He's a wrecking ball. Yes, he's not as good of a pure scorer of the basketball as Joel Embiid. He's not nearly the offensive player that Jokic is, but his two-way ceiling has got to be the highest because he can hang 40 on you in 4 out of 5 games and be the best defensive player by far out of these 3. The difference is just the consistency, and it's not just availability, Jason. Those two, as these perennial MVP candidates, a status that they've both earned as these consistent, carry their team night to night guys, just have a different level of consistency. Jokic may not take 15 shots every single game. He's going to touch the ball 110 times. He's going to dictate basically every possession, and he's going to lead to elite offense. Embiid is basically just going to get his 30 and be the most important defensive piece for the Sixers every night. And AD just has never had that consistency, the aggression, the mentality. Like, even in the last few weeks, among these incredible masterpieces, you have that 8-point game. You have a pair of 15-point games. Like, it's just different. And that's why I think those two guys have to have the edge. But yes, AD has proven it. And he had these 2 years of like shocking regression. But this AD right now is as good as bubble AD. He is. I mean, he's added new elements to his game more consistently that are more legitimate, in my opinion, than him having a 38% 3-point shooting run that was just never going to be replicated. So no, I don't think that you're out of bounds, but it's the consistency that separates these 3 to me.
That the level of footwork he's been demonstrating, particularly in the last 2 games, it's like old school Hakeem Olajuwon, like pivot, spin over both shoulders. He actually looks a touch quicker than he has in the last couple of years. I think it's just a product of how much the Lakers have needed to lean on him as of late and him just dropping weight. Look, here's the thing. When you're putting together a list, you have to put Jokic and Embiid in front. They've earned that right. But, I mean, I would argue, especially in a playoff setting, if he's healthy in a playoff series, there's a case. I'm not saying I would necessarily take that pick, but there's a case that AD is the guy that you would pick for a series. Again, looking back to 2020, he was definitively a top 4 player, I thought. When you were looking at it, it was like LeBron, Steph, and KD were all still clearly ahead. But like coming out of that 2020 playoff, now Giannis has since lapped him. That's a fact. But coming out of the 2020 playoff run, if you had Giannis over AD, you were the crazy guy. Like, because Giannis and his lack of half-court polish showed up in a big, ugly way in that Miami series. And Anthony Davis was the half-court, like tip of the spear for that Lakers team. And they would just dump the ball to him with 7 seconds on the shot clock. And they were scoring healthy over a point per possession. Like, he definitely is deserving of being in that tier, at least when we're evaluating for a playoff series. Before we move on really quick, I wanted to ask you, I said that Joel Embiid's play here the second half of the season has demonstrated to me that I think he's a slightly better player than Jokic. Are you ready to make that pick, or do you disagree with me?
No, I'm not quite ready to go there because I think that there is still an offensive gap that is really underrated. Like, the elevation that we see from Jokic night to night, it's unbelievable. And I agree with everything that you've laid out about the Nuggets playing their starters as much as they do together, and that sort of messing with some of the team impact stats. But the bottom line is that Jokic still consistently leads the best offense in basketball, or a top 3 offense, what has been the best team in the West consistently this year by far. And he does that all while being a liability defensively. I just think he is a generational, easily top 10 offensive player of all time. And that, to me, makes up for the defensive gap, where I just feel that Embiid is a bit overrated. I still think he's a plodding guy who can be exposed in space. He's a good rim protector, but is holding guys like 2% below their average shooting percentage around the rim this year. So it's not a dominant, like Giannis is 16, right? Giannis is just this unfathomable help side rim protector. Embiid is big. He takes up a lot of space. He's good there, but I don't think he's great. So no, I'm not quite there with you. And I will say, if we're going to have this whole, hey, both these guys need to prove more in the playoffs, Jokic has been way better in the playoffs than Embiid. Embiid has maybe once played up to expectations in a playoff series. Jokic has done everything. He's just been exploited a bit more defensively. But offensively, he's been every bit as brilliant as ever. Maybe even more so because he's more aggressive.
So that's interesting. I actually go the opposite direction on the playoff side. I think they've been more even. I think Embiid's been a much better playoff defensive player than Nikola Jokic. But the big thing with Embiid is his jump shot falling apart when he reaches that stage. And
Yeah.
that's such a pivotal, important part of his game. And that's going to be what I'm keeping an eye on in this playoff run. But I don't think it's fair to give a playoff edge to either of them. Cause like sometimes with Embiid too, like, do you remember that Raptors series a couple years ago where it was like, he was shooting terribly. It was like he shot like 33% from the field for the series, but like they just dominated the Raptors whenever he was on the floor and got their ass kicked every time he was off the floor. Like I do think.
Oh, are we using on off? Are we using on off stuff now, Jason? Very interesting pivot. Yeah, I don't know. I just think we've consistently seen the efficiency and production drop with Embiid. Like he's under 47% from the field in his playoff career, under 30% from three, 24 a game. That's just not the same Embiid that we've seen in the regular season. This absolute monster. So I would say Jokic has been the better playoff player, but I mean, AD, just to bring it back to him, has fought his way back into this conversation. He's earned it. He fell way out of it. And he had a stretch earlier this year, which now, I mean, he's had that second unbelievable run, but the 9-game stretch where he averaged 35, 15, and 3 blocks per game, literally nobody has ever done that. Akeem, David Robinson, Shaq, Wilt probably did it 100 times, but they didn't track blocks. And he did it on 72% true shooting. So it's like, you can't deny what he's capable of. It's just, let's see it more consistently. And hopefully in an actual playoff run this year, if the Lakers can get it all together, that would be a lot of fun because I hate to see wasted potential, Jason. It's no fun. Let's pivot to another game that we saw tonight between a couple of Titans out East, including Joel Embiid. Bucks beat the Sixers. What did you take away from that game?
It was interesting. The Giannis and the Bucks needed this game more than I think the Philly did. Obviously, it was an opportunity for Embiid to put another stamp on the MVP race, which he passed on in the Denver game. Which we're gonna take a quick break here. Did you have anything to say about Embiid skipping that Nuggets game the other night?
No, not other than I think that. Well, this is a conversation we'll have later. I'm growing increasingly anti-load management, but if it makes sense for anyone, it's Embiid in his third game in 4 nights. I was just surprised that he would even allow that after the interview came out that morning. I'm like, that's just a bad look, but no, I do not think Embiid is ducking Jokic, and I think that if you think that, that's ridiculous.
Carson,
like, if he thinks he's better,
he played
go out
13
there.
Straight games.
Oh, you
then
think he's ducking
skipped
him?
That one. Then played every game since. I'm not saying I'm not saying he's ducking him, but it's not a good look. It's not a good look to play 13 straight games, including a back-to-back without James Harden, games that you probably were going to lose anyway, to then skip that particular game. When that game, we know from the straw poll that the MVP race was on like the 50-yard line. Like it was dead heat between Jokic and Embiid. Like it was there for the taking. And again, like it was, to me, it was just like the part that I couldn't figure out was just from the standpoint of as a competitor and like how do you not want to try to beat him again? But that said, like I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he had some tightness in his calf and he just decided to rest, but it was weird to play 13 consecutive games and then to hop back for those last 2. But so in this particular game, the Bucks came out with a much higher defensive energy. They were the big schematic thing that stood out to me from this game, which stood out from their last matchup, was just Giannis sticking Giannis on PJ Tucker in the weak side corner. And he's already the most devastating help defender in the league. Because again, you guys got to think of it this way. Like James Harden coming off of a ball screen, they like to trap, right? You'd like to be able to show high, not necessarily trap, but bring your ball screen defender up high out to hedge so that James Harden can't get downhill or to his pull-up 3, and you're chasing him over the top of the screen. So you're throwing that pocket pass to Joel Embiid at the free throw line. And Giannis is just waiting for him there every single time in help. And then he's such a great athlete that even when there's good shooters out there, he can get a good contest. But here's the thing. Philly's the best spot-up team in the league. But PJ Tucker's not one of those guys. And again, he tries to impact the game as best as he can in that position. But I mean, they basically played the Bucks to a draw when Tucker was off the floor and got their ass kicked when Tucker was on the floor. And I thought a big part of that was Giannis and help. And then a big underrated part of that too is, especially against teams like Philly that are bad transition defenses, I look at like positioning Giannis and help as the perfect transition start. Like Tucker's in the corner. He's standing, getting uncontested rebounds on all of the missed shots that take place in that action. And he's just grabbing and going. every single time. And again, and I thought he passed the ball pretty well in this particular game. I think he only had like 4 assists, but he was making the right reads and making Philly pay every time they sent extra defenders. And that was just getting him better opportunities to get downhill. It's urgency and physicality and all the effort stuff that went Milwaukee's way is a huge swing factor. But that's the biggest matchup piece that stood out to me, because if you have to take PJ Tucker off the floor, that's the guy you want to guard Giannis with on the other end of the floor, right? So it's a pretty tough give and take. And then the one other thing was just the Grayson Allen injury, tweaked his ankle on like kind of a funky step on the baseline. And that specific position has been a little bit of an issue for the Bucks because Pat Connaughton hasn't played especially well. And when they size up and go with guys like Ingles and Jay Crowder, they really struggle to contain on the perimeter, which we saw in the Celtics game. So like it's just that's a really unfortunate little ankle twist here. It's so close to the playoffs, but hopefully they'll have a good enough first round matchup that it won't bother them too much.
Yeah, I agree with everything you laid out. This also just felt like a game where it was kind of like, hey, Milwaukee's just better. I mean, when you get this level of impact from Drew and Middleton, and Bobby Portis had a great game. Giannis got whatever he wanted. He missed 4 shots. 2 of them were just dumb jump shots that I'm like, Giannis, why do you still do this? You know, the top of the key 3 had a weird pull-up jumper. And the one thing I do think that was interesting on top of everything you said is Embiid is not always a guy who needs to get all the way to the rim to be super effective, right? Because he's such a lethal pull-up jump shooter. If it's off the short roll, getting to that free throw line, he can kill you from everywhere. He can also kill you just getting to the line. But we do know how dominant Milwaukee's interior defense is. It did feel like Embiid was settling a bit in this game at times. 1 of 7 from deep. Only, I believe, he only made 2 shots inside of 5 feet in that restricted area all game, and he took 25 of them. So I thought that they did a good job on him, but I do agree. It just felt like there was more urgency. There was more intensity for Milwaukee. And in a regular season game like this, that can really be a majority of the difference. Let's talk about the Dallas Mavericks, Jason, because they lost again tonight in the Hawks in overtime. They're now a game back of Oklahoma City for that 10 seed, but they're effectively 2 games back because they do not have the tiebreaker. This is with 3 games remaining for each of these teams. Are they dead?
Man, it's close. Oklahoma City gave Phoenix a little bit of a run today, and had they won that game, it would have been over. Actually legitimately over. But you know, that was a really funky game. I'm not sure if you caught it, Carson, but our producer Ryan was joking with us earlier. He's like, why did Quinn Snyder wait so long to jump back into coaching just to take on that Atlanta Hawks job with Trae Young, the coach killer? They're just kind of like, it's funny because watching that game, like I as a basketball fan, I love watching Kyrie Irving so much, but everything else about watching those 2 teams play is just like, it makes me want to claw my eyes out, you know? Mm-hmm. There was a really weird sequence at the end of this one. Quinn Snyder tried to give it away. I don't know if you saw it, but when they got that offensive rebound off the missed Christian Wood free throw, they ran a lob play for JaVale McGee. There's only 0.4 of a second left, and they had Clint Capella like way out to prepare to like show or to hedge on any sort of like catch and shoot opportunity. And like the funny thing is to get a shot off in 0.4 of a second, it has to be utterly perfect, right? Yeah. And it just was so obvious that the biggest threat to them was the lob, and they just gave up that lob pass to JaVale McGee. I did think it was. Here's the thing: it's over. Like the Mavs, they don't have. It's the same issue we were talking about with the Golden State Warriors, where like they need perfection from Luka and Kyrie to overcome their physical disadvantages. But as I've said many times when we've talked about this team, I don't really judge them this year. I mean, there's no doubt that it's a catastrophe to entirely miss the playoffs, right? That's a catastrophe under any circumstance. But they were just going to get their ass kicked in a first round series against anybody, even if they happen to get out of the play-in tournament. That was just the reality of their predicament. I did like what they went with down the stretch of that game, though, with Christian Wood and JaVale McGee on the floor. Just going huge just gives them a better fighting chance in the physicality areas of the game. And by the way, McGee was a +13 and Christian Wood was a +10. And again, it probably won't be those 2 guys, but that's such a great example of that concept that I was talking about the last time we talked about the Mavericks. When you have surgical offensive players like Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, you can sacrifice offensive skill in your role players as long as they can compete with the physicality areas of the game. So that's the blueprint right there. Go huge and athletic around Luka and Kyrie and let them make everything offensively. Obviously, it puts a lot on them as shot makers, but again, this is a catastrophe. It's awful, but they were just going to get their ass kicked, and really it's about next season, but you've seen the blueprint and how they need to go.
Yeah, there's just a lot that needs to be improved upon, and that's where we're going to have to see some creativity this offseason. Like, they have some mid-sized contracts here that they could potentially move, like a Tim Hardaway Jr., who does not merit what he's getting at this point. If you could attach something to the Bertans contract, like maybe you can get somebody to take that on and you try to flip it into a really good two-way wing, because they need that unequivocally. They need to upgrade in the front court all around, especially defensively. And I love Christian Wood. I always have, because I was watching him in Detroit dropping 20 and 10 in these meaningless April games. And I was like, this guy's skilled. He's athletic.
This guy can play.
He can handle. And I've always loved him for that. But the bottom line is that he can't play at the 5 for this team. When you have two liabilities at the point of attack and you don't have a great defensive wing, it doesn't matter all the fun things he can do offensively. Your offense is going to be really good no matter what, because you have Kyrie and Luka, and he's going to hurt you defensively where you just can't afford to take any more damage. So that's what it's going to be all about. I agree with you. This is a bad look. It's embarrassing when you are coming off a conference finals run and you were like a top 2 team in the second half of last regular season, and they were actually defending well and they had all this going right. And then they let Brunson walk. And we know that they could have had him for 4 years, $48 million if they had the foresight. And now he's a bona fide star. Like, there's a lot that's gone wrong in Dallas, and bringing Kyrie into this mix is a dangerous thing to add to the potion of disaster, but it's also potentially the thing that could save them. It just requires a lot going right. And there's a lot up in the air here. And I just don't feel great about where Dallas is at. And it's just a concerning dynamic overall, I would say. And in terms of if they can do it this year, sure. I mean, they have the potential to explode offensively in any couple of matchups. They could beat Sacramento and Chicago and San Antonio, but it's like you said, it doesn't matter because they're one of the worst defenses in the league. They have been all year, and they're not going to beat the Nuggets, right, in a first round series. They're just too far behind on that.
It's inevitable. Yeah, it's inevitable.
Yeah. Let's take things big picture here for a second, because we just had a new CBA that was agreed upon yesterday, and a few key takeaways from that, Jason. Comment on whatever you want. The NBA has basically moved towards limiting the spending that we can see from the teams that are most willing to spend high amounts in the league. So they've put a second salary cap apron, which is $17.5 million above the luxury tax, that if you are above that, you can't even use the tax player mid-level exception to sign players. That was an interesting move. Other things that we saw in that CBA, now a 65-game minimum for awards eligibility, a mid-season tournament. What stands out to you from all that news that we got?
It's unfortunate because there are some good things in there, right? Like the mandatory minimums for awards. I think that will help. It'll never do the same thing as shortening the season, but that will help. I'm glad they let the players start smoking weed like that. That's just the dumbest thing in the world when weed is demonized the way that it is. But they're allowed to drink as much as they want. It's just silly.
Right.
So there's some things that I liked, but the reality is did they shorten the season? No. So that doesn't send the game in the right direction, in my opinion. Like, the best way to get players to play games is to build in the rest into the schedule by spacing the games out more. Like, how are you going to get a guy who makes $45 million a year to play a back-to-back against the Thunder and the Nuggets in February? You're just not going to be able to, right? And if you space the games out to where there are no back-to-backs and there's multiple times a week where you're getting, or every single week you have at least one stretch where you get 2 days off consecutively, like little things like that will effectively be your load management. That also increases the urgency of each game. By shortening the season, each game just, like, if you shorten the season by 20%, each game becomes 20% more important. It's just simple math. And so I think that was the direction they needed to go. I mean, I'm going to keep an open mind about this midseason tournament thing. But like the reality is I can't imagine any. Do you think LeBron's going to care about a midseason tournament? Like, do you think that that's an accolade that he's after? Like, no. So I have a hard time believing it's going to be anything more than just exhibition games if they don't have any impact on the standings. And so it's like, and then the luxury tax penalties thing, it's completely illogical to me.
Yeah.
It's a lashing out reaction to this Kevin Durant Warriors situation where They ended up with the assets to get D'Angelo Russell, to get Andrew Wiggins, and they don't want to have that happen again where you have this massive payroll. But the reality of the situation is that was a fluky occurrence with a massive cap spike that was not smoothed out, with Steph Curry on a bargain contract. It was the perfect storm of events that led to the Kevin Durant signing. Nobody's going to go sign a superstar this summer in the luxury tax. It's just silly to me. And most importantly, it punishes good teams who draft well. I would like to see them structure it in a way that makes it so that if you draft a player and your scouting department does their job to get a good player, that player should count to the cap differently than if you go out and sign a free agent. That's the way to add real fairness to this process, in my opinion. So again, there's some good, but like, I just think it's going in the wrong direction.
The luxury thing to me makes no more sense at all. I agree with you completely. Like, you're going to punish really good teams who want to spend a lot of money, who want to add that last quality role player. It's just completely illogical to me. The one point that really stands out to me is the 65 game minimum, just in relation to that maybe being some sort of attempt to fix load management, because we have seen a disaster in the last 3 years in the NBA. And I pulled these numbers a couple days ago because I was interested, because I'm just like, we are seeing stars sit so regularly. In the last 3 years, Jason, all stars have missed 20% of regular season games and 10% of playoff games. So whatever the exact cause of this is, right? I don't know the exact split between legitimate injuries versus load management, but we can look back even to 2017, 2019. Pace was similar, style was similar, ground covered was similar, right? It should be a similar toll on your body. Guys were playing 8% more regular season games, 6% more playoff games. We are in a like completely unprecedented disaster in terms of players availability. And the entire point of load management is, hey, we'll sacrifice the meaningless regular season game so our guys are ready for their playoff run. We've seen 18 All-Stars, Jason, miss 50 playoff games in the last 2 years. In 2014, not that long ago, 0 All-Stars missed a single game. I went back to 1988 to 90 because it was the most similar era in terms of a 3-year span when we're looking at pace to right now. Guys played 96% of regular season games, All-Stars, almost 99% of playoff games. So something is very wrong here. I think the season has to be shortened. Load management doesn't seem to be the fix.